First of all, thank you everyone for coming this evening. It's really good to see everyone here, and I think we're in for a really fantastic evening. First of all, can I just thank Professor Jane Falkingham, who's the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, who organised tonight's event. It's an absolutely fantastic event, and also to thank the Academy of Social Sciences. And I believe, Ed, you're going to say a few words just to explain why we're here.
Well, I don't know whether I can go that far. Just to say, tonight's event, yes, it is a joint event between the University of Southampton and the Campaign for Social Science, which exists to promote the benefits of investing in social science in order to give insights that can help policymakers to address some of the challenges and opportunities that we face as a society. And we are particularly grateful to colleagues at Southampton for partnering with us on this and for helping to bring together a really excellent panel, as I'm sure the Chair will go on and tell you. Tonight's event is being recorded and it will be hosted in due course on the Campaign for Social Science website in our Election 24 hub. Election 24 is a project we're running where we are, as I say, showcasing insights and foregrounding good social science research and practice to help policymakers draw on good social science evidence so that they can make evidence-based policy as we come into an election year. And the project has featured some in-person events. This is our third. We've previously been in Glasgow and Cardiff. We've got events coming up in Newcastle and Swansea. We've also had a series of webinars. And there are also some written pieces on the Election 24 hub. So do take a look. Do register for future events or future webinars if you think they might be of interest. And if you want to know any more, come and talk to me afterwards. But with that, I will hand you back over to the Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, sorry, I should have introduced myself. I'm Professor Jane Falkingham, and I'm one of the Vice Presidents at the University of Southampton, and I have the absolute honour of being the sponsor for our civic agenda. So the University of Southampton signed a Civic Universities Agreement earlier this year with our amazing council and also 4 of our other local authority partners. And this is the first time I've been in this room for an event. So this is also really exciting. So the university has been operational in Sir John Mathews since, I think, October, so start of this academic year. And we'll be putting on more and more events here as more and more of the building comes into operation. So without further ado, I'm going to ask the panel members to introduce themselves. And very strangely, I've got Councillor Daniel Fitzhenry on my left, and Councillor Satvir Kaur on my right.
But on everyone else's left.
But on everybody else. So
I'm on your left. That's
Daniel, why don't you...
We'll see how this goes, shall
we?
Yeah. So, evening everyone. I'm Councillor Daniel Fitzhenry. I lead the Conservative opposition team on the council here in Southampton.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Daniel. I'm Jagjit Chadha, the Director of the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, an 85-year-old research institute based in Westminster, independent, not politically aligned, trying to bring social science research from the frontier to the political arena. 7.5 years into the job, it's aged me about 35. If anybody else wants the job, please let me know.
Hi, I'm Alice Brock. I'm the Sustainable Development Goals Project Officer, which is an incredibly long name, for the Sustainability and Resilience Institute at the University of Southampton. I'm also finishing my PhD, so I've got kind of a view on the research side of things as well.
Hi, I'm Chris Armstrong. I'm a Professor of Political Theory at the University of Southampton, where I've been for a really long time, about 18 years now, I think. I work on issues like global justice, climate justice, social justice. They're all in my kind of wheelhouse.
Hi, Councillor Satvir Kaur, Leader of Southampton City Council. I'm also a graduate from the Social Sciences team from the university, so it's nice to be back.
Right, thank you. And I've got lots of questions that have been submitted online in advance of tonight. And so I said earlier I would channel my Fiona Bruce, but I was told that probably wasn't a good idea, so I'll just channel myself. But our first question is from Catherine Barber. Catherine.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Barber. I was asked to introduce myself. I'm also a graduate of the University of Southampton. I did my MBA there a few years ago. I have very fond memories of lectures between 6 and 9 in the evening, fitting it in with full-time work. I'm the first ever Green Councillor here in Southampton and live in Portswood, and really happy to be part of this city. So my question is for the panel: how can sustainable growth be considered in one phrase? I believe the two words are at odds to each other. Could you elaborate, please?
So who would like to start? Maybe Alice, given you're the sustainable.
I am the sustainable person, yes. I had a bit of a quandary with this one, because in a lot of ways, yes, if we're talking about traditional GDP, where we're constantly consuming, that doesn't really fit with the idea of sustainability. That's, you look at every paper that has examined this, it goes, we can't keep consuming. You look at any kind of theory around that, there's the kind of thing about spaceship Earth, we're kind of a closed system, we can't really bring new stuff in. So if you're looking at that traditional model of growth, which is based on GDP, yeah, it's a complicated thing. However, it kind of depends on what we're considering as growth. Are we going to use that traditional model, or are there other ways that we can measure our prosperity, our well-being? People discuss things like circular economy as well, so the idea of decoupling kind of our growth from consuming. But there's kind of a lot of conversation about if that's actually feasible and has anyone actually worked that out. So I do really sympathise with this question. Because, yeah, I personally haven't seen any evidence that it can be done in the way that maybe people think it can, that we can carry on life as normal. But there are people trying to sort of work out ways that maybe we can still prosper and grow as a community and society without it being so tied to GDP.
I'm going to turn for the view of the economists now to Jagjit.
Oh, thank you. It's a very good question on sustainability. There are many ways of interpreting sustainability. One is the Gordon Brown answer, no boom and bust. So we grow at a steady rate that doesn't lead to economic recession or booms, because in those, what we tend to see is an increase in income and wealth inequality. Unfortunately, busts affect the poorest most, and the cost of living crisis that we're living through is one that is sadly borne most by those who can at least afford to deal with it. They allocate a much larger fraction of their income to food and energy. They also work in jobs typically that are not increasing in their productivity. They're what we tend to call low productivity jobs with low wages, so they haven't got much disposable income. So part of a growth agenda must be about thinking how we raise the living standards of those in the bottom couple of deciles. That means thinking about investment in firms so they can pay higher wages. That means investment in skills, so people with the capital that they have are more productive than they would otherwise be. But in the longer run, it really means thinking about the resources that we produce and what we exhaust in producing that. And of course, there's a very important debate on natural capital, the use of the environment, and the extent to which that is appropriately priced in the way we think about things. Essentially, we've been drawing it down over a couple of centuries now without paying the price for it. And providing we can arrive at that solution, which my very good friend and neighbour Parth Dasgupta has been talking about for a very long time. Everyone should read his book on natural capital, which he's produced with Treasury and the government. If we can get this right, I could start to be optimistic about that. And growth itself should not be thought of as a bad thing if it can bring about a sustained improvement in living standards. It will allow us to pay for schools, hospitals, transport, infrastructure that is sadly well behind the international frontier in this country at the moment. And I think that's a sort of, not an embarrassment, somewhat of a disgrace that we've ended up in this position around the country. And we need to think about how we fund that, and that's got to be through growth.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Jane. Well, I come from the school of thought of that we are positive, growth-minded people. It's the human spirit that creates what we create. It's not anything else. And so I actually believe growth can be highly sustainable. We haven't had to do that in many ways because we've had an abundance of cheaper energy provision, which effectively, and we transitioned into an oil-based economy over the last 150 years. And that has been abundantly available and has become more available, of course, as prices have gone up. And there has always been a concern that we will run out, and we never have yet run out. And there's this debate going on about peak oil at the moment, isn't there? When are we going to hit it? So I think, Catherine, for me, I'm a believer in human spirit and ingenuity to find new solutions, and that can be very sustainable. So growth actually can be incredibly sustainable But there are transitions. We didn't end up here overnight, and we're not going to get where we want to get to overnight. And we all know when we get to 2050, we'll be facing new challenges, whatever those challenges are that we can't see right now. But we're in a very unproductive economy. And actually, most of the G7 and the G20 are quite unproductive because the amount we're borrowing as economies is significant. The amount of interest and debt we're repaying is considerable. You know, if we can use capital more effectively and more efficiently, because sustainability is about efficiency and productivity and output and raising standards for the poorest, and skills is crucial to that in my mind. Allowing people to take their God-given ability to provide value and support them in doing that, I believe is what we should be doing as best we can. So I start from a place of positiveness. I don't buy into all the negativeness. It doesn't mean to say that I don't agree with some of it, but I believe that we can find positive solutions and we can continue to grow, but it won't look like it has over the last 50, 100, 150, 200 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Chris gets to go last.
Yeah.
So, if I'm honest, it really, really frustrates me when people talk about how we can't afford to be sustainable because it doesn't align with growth. I would argue you can't afford not to be sustainable, and actually it does increase growth. I think it's so integrated and so vital that people start mentally thinking about them absolutely joined at the hip. You can't have one without the other. So it's one of the reasons that from a council perspective, we've set up a Renaissance board, which has all the anchor institutions around the table, and we've got 3 priorities for the city: becoming a marina maritime city, destination city, and the final one is sustainable city, because we see it as such an important part of future growth and where the jobs of the future are going to be. And we see our city and our region as having all the right ingredients for that growth and bringing in inward investment within that space, that we want to be leaders in that space rather than followers. I mean, using Southampton as an example, we were the first people in the 1980s. Alan Whitehead kind of started the first kind of district geothermal scheme that now has been rolled out across the country. A few years ago, we had the first commercial port to use shore power. When it comes to the green industry and growth, there are a number of skills that are associated with that. There are a number of new jobs associated with that we're already missing out on to other countries, that we really need to be leaders in. And I mean, if you look at the space of using I'm a bit of a housing nerd, but using housing as an example, at the moment, people are spending money building homes that are going to need to be retrofitted within 5 years' time. That is absolute madness. We are costing ourselves money rather than saving money. Of course, we want to look at the most people that are most deprived, but actually, if we didn't cut a decade ago around energy efficiency, we'd be saving people money on their energy bills at the moment. It wouldn't be an issue. We wouldn't be all this talk about, oh, we're subject to Putin's war and all the rest of it. Why are we dependent on an energy source from across the world when actually we should be allowed to generate our own energy? We need the national grid to sort itself out, because every business I talk to wants to expand and wants to grow their business but are restricted by the national grid. So that needs to be sorted. It's why the Labour Party have said they want to go strong on the economy, have talked about their green prosperity plan and investing in that, because they absolutely see it as the future of this country and the future of the economy. I can go on forever, but I'm very, very passionate about it. So no, I don't disagree that they are somehow separate. If anything, you can't have one without the other.
Thank you. And I just saw that obviously the U1 bus is working very well. And we've just had a batch of people arrive on it, so nice to see you. I'll give Chris the last word on this one.
This is a really, really important question. It's something that worries me a lot. I think, on the one hand, as Daniel says, growth has done a lot for us. Growth has brought millions, billions of people out of poverty. But I'm really worried that our continued political addiction to growth is now taking us in really dangerous places. So Jagjit mentioned the Dasgupta, part of Dasgupta. He has this big doorstopper, the Dasgupta Review on the Economics of Biodiversity. You could read the executive summary, maybe. And what's really interesting about that is that Dasgupta is, a really mainstream economist saying that we are steadily eroding the ecological foundations of our societies, and we need to shift course. Right? We can't have endless GDP growth. We can't keep on consuming the natural capital of our world and assume that it will keep on providing the services that we depend on. So we need to look to all kinds of different alternatives for growth as people, growth as communities, but we also need to think about questions of distribution. If we're not going to be seeing the kinds of GDP growth that we've seen in the past, and it looks like growth has been sluggish for some time, we need to think really seriously about who gets what and how we can spread our wealth around in a fair way, I think.
Thanks, Chris. We've had quite a lot of questions come in on the growth agenda, but I'm going to move us on to a question on generations, which actually does link across to what we've been talking about here. We've got two questions. The first is actually from Councillor Pat Evemy. Thank you. Pat, please.
Given the challenges of future sustainability, why do so many young people decide not to vote in elections?
So I'm going to start with the politicians on this one rather than the academics. Satvir.
You should have given me some prep with that one. No, I know it's particularly an issue for your ward, which has so many students in there, and I know it's really frustrated us. A plea to the universities is there's a huge frustration that a lot of students don't register to vote, and actually, personally, I think it's far easier to do an opt-out once you become a student rather than an opt-in, because you should be having a say over where you live and your local neighbourhood and your council. So I've been asking for it for years, so anyone that can help sort that out, university people, that would be fantastic. So it's not that, so from my opinion, in answer to your question, I don't think it's a case that young people don't care, and I think it frustrates me when people act like young people are this one homogeneous blob, because they're not. They passionately care about their neighbourhood, their friends, what's impacting them. A lot of the decisions that government makes is going to impact them in future. What we do now, particularly around this topic, is probably going to impact the next generation so much more than it's going to impact ours and future generations. I find this more in areas of deprivation and young people. Like, I'm born and bred in a city, by the way, free school meals kid. And I think I think the barrier is a sense of belonging, aspiration, thinking that your views are going to go somewhere. And I think that representation has a huge part to play in that as well. I mean, we're quite unique in Southampton, where we do have a lot more younger people compared to other ones. Other councils, but I do think there's a big part we need to play in getting young people more involved with decision making in Southampton. We're becoming a trial-friendly city for Southampton, where we get young people more involved with decision making on policy and kind of place shaping, and hopefully that will start to change things. But my concern is that we continue to treat them like an us and them, and actually the issues that we're dealing with will impact young people. They do have a say. It's about getting them round the right tables. And I think, sorry, I feel like I'm going on too much, but I feel like our default is inviting them to a board meeting, whereas they're probably just going to sit there, not really understand the jargon and not really then therefore engage. And we think they're disengaged, but actually going to young people saying, what is most important to you? How do we work with you to try to address those issues and concerns?
Yeah, I mean, as humans, we all have a priority list, don't we, of things that we want to do, things that are important, the time we allocate to it, and that will change as we get older. I think the system is very open. You know, anyone at age 18 and above can vote. If people choose not to, they choose not to. Now, there is a point around our job as politicians is to make sure that things are as clear and as easy accessible as possible. I think we're in a period of time where more people, if they were going to vote, are going to vote now. I mean, we've had some pretty high turnouts in the last few elections, some pretty seismic stuff for the UK, and there's a lot going on internationally. The interesting thing that we all have to deal with, and I think as humans we're a bit like this, is, my vote doesn't affect what's going on. Well, it absolutely does affect what's going on, whoever you vote for. And there is an accountability piece there where we all say, if I go and put my cross by the ballot paper, I don't get what I want immediately, I'm not going to do it again. But there's a civic duty as well as a responsibility, a civic duty to everybody to vote, in my opinion, but there's also a responsibility as politicians to make it as accessible and easy to understand. And that's a challenge for us all. I mean, Satvir and I have had the benefit of being leader of the council, and we know that we'll be on boards and doing something, sometimes going, I think I get that, but we have to make judgments. So there is a piece around politicians doing their best, but there's also bluntly a responsibility for people to go to the ballot box if they want to go to the ballot box, and if they want to, they'll go.
So I'm going to go on to the second question on generations, but again, it's linked through to the first one, thinking about sustainability, and I'm going to ask my academic colleagues to focus a little bit more on the sustainability side of things. So, Kamal Ozbek, please, your question.
Thanks. Hello, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening. So my question is, how should we evaluate well-being of future generations in today's decision-making processes?
So that's quite a technical question. How are we going to evaluate the well-being of future generations in today's decision-making? If we're looking at a cost-benefit analysis, for example.
I can feel you coming towards me.
Yeah.
Just to try and sum up an answer to all the questions put so far. One of the reasons we're focusing on growth as a country, and we heard it N times N yesterday during the autumn statement, is that we've been stagnant for a generation. Income per head has grown at barely 0.5% since the financial crisis. And where it has grown is actually at the top of the distribution. So actually there has been growth, a lot of growth, for those lucky enough to have high levels of human capital, to be working in strong networks in the city and the southeast, who work in accountancy, high-value services like the law, IT, and the city. But the rest of the country has stagnated. And a lot of that is one of the reasons, it seems to me, that many young people, unfortunately, are switching off. They're saying to themselves, I can't do anything about this. This is too hard. I'm not going to, this evening, go into the ins and outs, the pros and cons of Brexit. But it's something that closed a lot of opportunities for many young people, followed by what is effectively a 2 to 3 year period of being unable to progress their careers because of COVID. And then the shock of trying to deal with limited finances and the need to pay student loans following the increase in energy and household costs. It's been particularly damaging for young people in the last few years. And there's two responses to that, I guess. One is that they switch off, leave the workplace, and just sort of give up, which would be an absolute disaster for the country. The other is they get galvanised into action. And one of the reasons they haven't galvanised as well is the work we've been doing with the BBC on trying to understand the extent to which media is consumed in a very different way by people of different generations. People of my age, I still get a newspaper delivered. I guess I might be the only one. I know. And I read it I read 2, actually, papers every day. And that puts me in a certain age bracket, and I watch the news at 10. I know my own children, and people even younger, do things in a very different way. And we're not necessarily engaging with them in the way that we ought to, or thinking about engaging with them. And I think that's incredibly important. If we don't engage with the young, they will switch off. Now, there are a number of ways we can do that. One is we have to have inspiring ideas from our politicians. And I'm afraid, and I have nothing more than high regard for politicians, it's a very tough job. But we get the politicians we deserve. And the leaders we've had in the last few years have, to my eyes, been desperately disappointing. And unless young people are given alternatives they can believe in, they won't necessarily participate in the way that they want to, and they need ideas. And I think I'd say one thing, to sort of finish this point, is that the one thing is to remember, and this is the week in which we remember the 60th anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. There was a man who inspired a whole bunch of people to think about how they could build a better country and what they could do for it. And it would seem to me that is something we have to think about in this country. How can we inspire people and think longer term? So your point about intergenerational stuff comes into many bits of economics. Treasury, the city, firms tend to place too high a weight on short-term returns over long-term returns. Technical phrase, we discount the future at too high a rate in this country. The way that, for example, HS2 panned out, had there been a clear commitment to do it from the beginning, it wouldn't have turned out to be as expensive as it turned out to be, and it probably could have been built by now. I make no statements about whether it was affecting people's backyards if a train was going through it or not. But the way that we do these things smacks of short-termism, and of course that is ultimately damaging to the young, because a lot of these projects that we need in this country will probably not benefit me, they'll see me out. There are other people we need to think about, and that's the problem we have time and time again. You've only got to read any political memoir. Forgive me, the politicians, I'm not criticising you guys. But what happens in this country is that things go wrong, things go wrong, things go wrong. Then four men get in a room with a cigar, beers, and sandwiches. Nothing wrong with those three things, but they get in a room and they cobble up a solution, and that's the end of it, and we move on to the next problem. There's an absence, time and time again, of long-term thinking and planning in this country that ultimately damages the young and might play a role in disenfranchising them.
Thank you very much. Chris, I'm going to give the youngest person on the panel the last word on this one. So, Chris.
Okay, so I think there were two questions. I think the first one is really about participation, and the second one is about representation, I think. So, first part of the problem is how do we get young people participating more? And I think I am really worried about the disengagement of the young. I think it's partly a vicious circle because the young feel disempowered, they opt out, and that disempowers them, so their political voice doesn't count very much. So I don't think solving that is easy. There are some interesting ideas out there. We might try lowering the voting age, right, to empower young people, to make them feel their strength as a group. Satvir reminded me that there is also the importance of voter ID rules and laws. So it looks at the moment as if we have some rules which are asymmetrically affecting different generations. So it's going to be harder for young people to prove their eligibility to vote than it is for older people. And that just looks like compounding that kind of injustice in representation, I think. Okay, so the second thing was about representing generations and the future. So this is something that political theorists have thought about a lot. This is something that political scientists have thought about a lot. So the people who are not yet born are vulnerable to our decisions in a kind of asymmetric way, right? We can harm them, but they can't harm us. How do we make sure that they are more present in our politics? So one way of doing it is by having, combating harmful short-termism. There are all kinds of ways we can do it. So we could have ombudsmen for future generations. We could enfranchise the young because they're going to be around a lot longer, making decisions for the future. We can try and represent future people. We can try and represent non-humans, right? We can extend questions about representation in all kinds of ways. But I think the way in which political decisions get made in the short-termist way doesn't have any one single solution, but it's absolutely one of the most serious problems that we face. And I think partly explains a kind of disaffection from politics, the short-termist nature of decision-making.
As the youngest person here, I think. So that's, it's really, on the panel, it's really interesting because where people are kind of saying, they're disenfranchised. Every young person I know, and I'm still friends with lots of undergrads, I'm friends with 18-year-olds, they care a lot, and they care a lot about sustainability. And it's not that they kind of don't know about voting, it's that they go, actually, there's two main parties and they're as bad as each other. And that's unfortunately what a lot of young people think. And they go, well, they're kind of leaning towards the same thing. They care too much about industry. They don't care about me. They're not representing me. This person's married to this person who's getting the benefit from that. And that's the kind of thing that we are talking about in the pub. It's the kind of thing that you are talking about socially. So when you go, you're going to vote? And they go, what's the point? It's all going to go to... Well, actually, I'm not going to repeat the word they would have said in the pub, but it's all going to go badly. What's the point of me trying? I'm not going to have an influence here because they're just as bad as each other. And maybe the odd kind of person from another party gets elected, but they're aware that that's not enough to kind of represent how they feel about things. And that's the kind of feeling I have. Now, I will say I have voted in everything. But there was another conversation I had with a friend not long ago where she didn't realise the difference between councils and MPs. She thought her MP was responsible for her bins. So there's not actually that understanding of what the different votes might mean. And I think maybe that's a kind of educational issue. I never learned anything at school, actually, about how our political system worked. I never got told what the difference between a council, parish council, your local council, a city council, MPs, back when we were in the EU, that worked. I never learnt any of that. So when you turn 18 and you get thrown into that system and get told to make a decision, well, how? I was lucky to have political people around me who explained things to me and took time to teach me about that. But our young people don't have that. And a lot of young people will actually talk to me. They know that I do sustainability and they go, well, are they actually different? Is this going to make a difference? And so I think that's a really key thing with young people. It's not they don't care and they care like a massive amount about sustainability. They just don't believe that what they do is going to make a difference. When we're talking about the second part was about evaluating well-being, I think it's actually a core kind of part of sustainability is meeting our own needs whilst making sure that people in the future generations can meet their own needs. And that is through long-term planning. You know, as people have said, you have to think about what we're using. Does that mean that your children might, well, I don't have any children, if I have children, you kind of look at it and go, should I? You kind of think about it. Sorry, that got dark. It's bringing my own trauma into things. I apologise. But we need to think about, I can go in for a lovely walk in the common. Is the next generation going to have that benefit? It's even down to those things about thinking long term. The resources we use mean they no longer have the ability to use them. Mm-hmm. So it needs to be that consideration of protecting things for future generations and for future use of those generations to live the same life that we hope we ourselves can live.
Brilliant, thanks, Alex. The first clap of the evening. We have so many questions to get through, so I hope you are all able to be here until 10 o'clock tonight. We've got AI, migration, health, education and social justice, just some small topics. But maybe we can motor along a little bit quicker. But Chris, you kind of opened yourself up for this one by talking about franchising non-humans in the future. Patrick, would you like to ask your question? Patrick Iro.
Thank you. I will ask Patrick's question, which is, given the focus on technology and AI in the UK, what sort of role should the social sciences play in influencing policy decisions? Thank you.
Tech and AI.
Yeah, okay.
And the role of social sciences.
I think that I'm a big advocate for the social sciences. My own bit of the social sciences is political theory, philosophy. We talk about what values ought to inform political policy. I think that is a really important part of questions when it comes to AI. Right? We can design driverless cars, but when we tell them how to behave, we need values, right? You know, should you swerve to avoid the mother in a pushchair, or should you, these are value decisions that can't be kind of abrogated by tech companies. We need to engage with the general population and not just political theorists, because we're not special. We need to engage in a big discussion about the kinds of technologies that we want, what the limits ought to be on what technology can do. I mean, I'm not going to say too much about AI because it's way above my pay grade.
Who else would like to come in on AI? Daniel.
Sure. Well, go back to my principal opening in the previous comments. I believe in human ingenuity. I think AI and tech is an incredible opportunity for us to solve problems we haven't managed to solve. But with any new technology comes new challenges. We don't even know what those challenges are yet. We don't have the regulatory framework. And the way that our economic system works is a small number of people will be making decisions that affect billions of people and the technology that's used. Now, that isn't a new principle. If you go back 500 years or even 1,000 years, the same things have happened just with different technologies. The financial system we currently have was created by a group of people around a table that thought a central bank would be a good idea, and then everyone followed the British model or the Dutch model and created them globally. So these aren't new concepts, but what we do not know is what the impact of AI and technology will be on our current activities and 5 to 10, 15 years down the line. And that creates quite a challenge for politicians because we're not specialists. Our job is to set out direction and be accountable. That's why you hire and fire us. You don't fire us to be the ins and outs of everything. You fire us or hire us to make decisions on your behalf. So we need good advice. And to have good advice, we need people that have a better understanding of something than we do. And that's where I think the social science role and the plethora of different faculties, from economics to science to to human relationships, to those people that are in the room are real dark catastrophists who go, you don't want to go anywhere near that. You need all those people around the table to have a really good discussion about what the potentiality, but also what the challenges are with this new technology. And you know, we're good at finding ways of making things work, aren't we? But if we don't try, we'll never know. And I think it's right to try, but we now need to fine tune and put in the legislative framework accordingly.
I mean, I am, of course, a strong believer in evidence-based policy. And the social sciences are the kind of most effective way to understand how people feel about things, how people are going to have different experiences based on their demographics, based on their lives. So I think the social sciences around anything new are incredibly important because they're the way we can actually find out what the public needs, wants, and what challenges they can perceive might happen or can expect to happen. So I think the social sciences are always going to be massively important related to any policy, but especially something like this, which has so many unknowns.
Good answer. Right, the social
I'm
sciences.
doing all right.
Satvir.
So for me, AI is inevitable and the future. It's just how you regulate it, and I agree, values do need to be put there. And also, if you just leave it to the market and then try to respond, you've almost missed a trick, because there's so many opportunities where you can use that new technology and AI to address social need or to further in spaces that you've never gone before. So I've recently visited Ocean Affinity, which is based in Southampton. It's an international company. Their AI is absolutely incredible, where basically their future, and they're doing it right now, which is kind of sailing ships from a pod, several pods, in a dark room, and there's about 2 people on this massive ship. Absolutely amazing. It's meaning that we're getting research and technology that we never would have got before. So it can be used for good, but you almost need to get there early rather than just be reactive and base regulations based on values. I think my concern is at the moment we're almost letting it go a bit wild, and then I think once it reaches a tipping point, I think only then will government act and say, oh, actually, maybe we should put some parameters around this. I mean, I would say this as a politician, but I found it absolutely terrifying what's coming out now, where you can AI someone's voice and say, this senior politician said this or was swearing about this person, and it's completely computer generated. That is terrifying for people that are accountable to people. So I personally believe it's the future and inevitable. We should be embracing it. You can tell I'm a friend of Dame Wendy Hall. So, of course, I'm a big fan of AI. My concern is not to fight it because it's inevitable, but do what we can to try to wield it and try and push it towards some social good.
Very hard to disagree with anything anyone has said with AI. Just what you think about is, with any new technology, as Daniel said, there'll be those who have it and those who don't. And there's a danger it will further entrench income and wealth inequalities that we see rising around the world. There'll be parts of the world that are able to exploit it, California, parts of this country, which is innovatively strong, and others. And there'll be parts of the world that potentially could be exploited by it, whether it's an actor who has their voice stolen or a politician who's made fun of. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. So I think in the end, it's a little bit like climate change. If it's out there in the world, we're going to need some global solutions here, something that we all sign up to try and to think about how we can limit the risks that we can at least begin to perceive and understand. And in a sense, it's a shame that maybe we can combine with the EU. One of the things the EU was good at was controlling the power of tech, the power of the companies from the States. And I think it combined pretty well in that process to rein in some of their excesses. And it could be we need to think about that. That's not to say that AI is necessarily a bad thing. But if you give enough power to enough people for long enough, there is a danger that they start to misbehave. I think we've seen that time and time again throughout history. So we need to think about ways of regulating that, and probably globally, I'd imagine as well. So there need to be some global structures here that we can all sign up to, which will require the input of lawyers, politicians, people working in ethics, certainly people with an understanding of political theory, and perhaps even the odd economist. But I think that needs to be brought in alongside that, because we know that innovation by itself can lead to excesses. You talked about the financial crisis. We were told 30 years ago that the financial sector was the way forward. It's something that would lead to trickle-down wealth around the economy and would create a better future for us all. It's something we were very good at. We lived in the right global time zone. We had the right level of human capital. We spoke English, all those kinds of things that meant that the country would do very well as a result of that. But when, and during the financial crisis, it went wrong through a lack of appropriate regulation, it was this country that bore the brunt of a lot of that impact and arguably is still suffering as a result. So just because we're on the vanguard of AI doesn't necessarily mean that'll be a good thing unless we get the regulation right. And we should do that. And I think everyone said that. So I haven't said anything new.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. Now we're changing tack again, and we're moving on to the topic of migration. And I'm going to ask colleagues if they can try and keep their answers shorter, so we get a chance to also...
Lecturers and politicians.
Yeah, I know. So we can also cover a little bit of health and education, because those are just, important topics too. But Professor Pia. The microphone is migrating.
Yes, I'm loud enough though. But so the sustainability agenda is going to have to address forced migration, especially, but not only climate migration. So a key issue is how to address how forced migrants can be mobilized to be agents of sustainable development. So my question is, in the context of the UK, where immigration systems treat refugees and asylum seekers as temporary phenomenon and often a direct threat to culture, wealth, security, what can councils do to support central government in advancing an approach for refugee and asylum seekers as an inherent and long-standing part of sustainable development and social transformation?
And that's a question, I think, for you, Satvir. What can councils do
with government
to support government?
So if government want our support, they need to start talking to us more and forget and get out of their mind that it's a phenomenon for starters, and stop pretending that once they've put asylum seekers in hotels, as soon as they're out of their hotels, suddenly that population doesn't exist, is a huge frustration for councils and actually makes me very upset. So in Southampton, we're a proud city of sanctuary. We've had people from all around the world make Southampton their home, mainly because we're a strategic port for thousands of years. It's the reason why we are the great city we are. We're multi-skilled, talented, diverse, resourceful. I mean, the University of Southampton is a classic example of migration working at its strength, because you bring all that talent and you bring it together and maximise its outputs. As a council, we have a lot of programmes in place to ensure that we celebrate our diversity, ensure that we are and we will continue to be a welcoming city. So not only, being a city of sanctuary isn't just the council, but we've got universities of sanctuary and schools of sanctuaries and libraries of sanctuaries and a theatre of sanctuary, you name it, we've got it. I suppose the frustration is, and it was kind of partly in your question, how I think immigrants, and I'm kind of second, third generation, immigrants are seen as kind of second-rate citizens, which is hugely frustrating. And it's not only people that have just come over, it is second, third generations. I remember having a debate with somebody around whether I was British or not, to which my conversation was at what point do you stop being an immigrant and start becoming a citizen of this country? So I think in Southampton, actually, we're quite lucky with our cohesion, and I think we use it as a strength, but there's lots of places that don't. And I do think the current narrative coming from government is really divisive and dangerous, and needs to be tackled head on and get away from the idea that migration is a bad thing because of migration you can't get a GP appointment, or you can't get your kid into the local school, or something else has happened. But actually, in reality, those public services have been starved of investment, and that's the reason why you can't get a GP appointment or your kid into a local school or other infrastructure. And actually start celebrating the fact that the UK is based on immigration. We've grown as a result of it. We will continue to grow as a result of it, and be proud of that and enhance it. And that's what we're trying to do in Southampton in the best way we can.
Daniel.
Thank you. Well, I disagree with a fair bit of what Satvir said there, but the fundamentals for me are that it is right, and if we're supporting government, that countries should have sovereign control over their immigration policy. And what that means then more locally is how do we support those that most need it in the best way possible? Now, we know there are sites in Southampton where there are numbers of people that are having their asylum seeker application processed, and we're looking after them. And I think it's right and proper that we look after people if they need it, but it's also right and proper that we have a limit and number on how many people we can do that for, so we can do a proper job of it. Local government's job, really, is to make sure that we deliver local services for local people. And at some stages, like in the Ukraine war situation, we legitimately opened our city and said, for a national system, come to our city, we will look after you. And we work very closely with government on that scheme. We also did it very closely with the Afghan support scheme at the appropriate time too. So there is quite a close link between local and national government. We've got to be able to fund services effectively, which means productivity gain, and it means income, and it means wealth creation in order to fund things. You know, Satvir and I could debate all day long that if there is a Labour government, this magic money tree that we're talking about might well go into play, but actually it is about having the resources available, and then it's using them as best you can within the context of everybody would always want more constantly. That's the nature of the beast that we're in. But local government can do a very, very effective job of working with national government to support those that most need it. But there has to be a limit to those numbers, and it has to be controlled. The UK is incredibly open, and rightly should be, because that benefited us, but there has to be controls and mechanisms around how we do that.
Thank you.
Migration is such a difficult issue, both the sense in looking after what we call the native population, but also giving opportunities that reflect tolerance and empathy for people around the world. People don't get in a boat other than having been pushed away by disasters in their own country. We would look to tolerance for those people who've suffered enormously in their process to get here. So I think let's look at the economics of this, which is what I should stick to probably. We have a very, what the economy called a tight labour market. We haven't got enough people to do the jobs that firms want to hire them for, so we've got a tight labour. As a consequence of that, we've had a huge increase in migration in the last couple of years. Some of the biggest numbers we've ever seen. You know, have some issues with ONS numbers and a number of levels, but they seem very high. And that seems right and proper. We've got twice as many vacancies across the country as the number of unemployed that we have. That's the sort of ratio we tend to look at for tightness in labour markets. The labour market is as tight as it's ever been. So it does seem to me that we can absorb more people. And the history of migrants is that they tend to be employed, tend to pay their taxes, and therefore they tend to give resources to government that could be allocated to the kind of public services that Daniel was rightly asking for, hospitals and schools. Now, for a number of political reasons, they were not allocated in that manner in the last couple of decades, which has led to shortages in public services that we're all worried about. So there's been some political choices as to how money has been spent, or indeed the policies that we've followed at the national level, which might be called austerity or sound money, that has left councils and governments starved of cash that they could have otherwise have had because of taxes being paid by migrants. So I think there needs to be a sort of rethinking about this. We don't particularly want large numbers of people to come in necessarily because there's too tight a labour market. In the longer run, we absolutely need to train better people domestically in vocational education. Perhaps there's been too much of an emphasis, I'd be careful I say this given I'm at the University of Southampton, on universities rather than places of vocational education. I think there are absolute shortages across the board in vocational areas. The University of Southampton might do some of those as well. So we might need to rethink how we do higher and further education that in the longer run will provide the skills and services that we need in the economy. Then in the shorter run, take a view as to what level of migration we're able to absorb in the country. But I would certainly favour a more tolerant, empathetic and understanding approach. And the whole issue of Rwanda seems to me to be a complete red herring, put forward as a smokescreen against a very high level of migration. I find the whole thing very difficult to understand. Perhaps someone can explain it to me later on. One bit of work the National Institute did recently was on refugees and whether they can work. And there was some work done by my colleagues looking at the impact on productivity and employment in a world of labour shortages and in a world in which very well-educated people are unable to work for long periods because their applications are being processed. And we find that's not a sensible thing. So we need to find ways of letting people who can work while their applications are being assessed. I don't think that's a problem in a tight labour market, and that's something maybe local authorities and government could just get together and arrange. I hate to see anyone not working who can work, but if I hear of a Syrian doctor who can't work and could work, and we're also being told there's a shortage of GPs, it just seems to me we should just sort that out.
Yeah,
So that would be my economist stance.
So you kind of asked here about sort of champion of sustainability and that kind of aspect, which I feel like we've kind of sidled round. We need a massive amount of diversity of, yes, skills and voice and all those things for sustainable development. That is part of the Sustainable Development Goals, is that we require people from across the spectrum to bring different experiences and different understandings of things that we might not have in our own communities. So from that perspective, having that broad range of people and celebrating the differences they have, people get quite scared about, like, we're going to lose our culture. British culture is a very big mishmash anyway. But bringing in those different things, those different methods of doing stuff, different people's kind of cultural ways of doing stuff, actually can have massive value in terms of how we do little things such as, like, how you preserve your food. It's these little things that actually can have. But really, I've learned a lot from people. I've got Polish friends and they're like, right, do you know how to ferment anything? And I went, no. They went, you need to learn because you can then preserve your food. And I was like, well, I would never have learnt that before. So that sounds like a little thing, but actually learning stuff from each other and appreciating those things is really important for sustainability.
Thank you. I think I'm going to move on, Chris, unless you've got a burning desire to jump in. And we're moving on to the topic of health. And Professor Deborah Gill, I believe you have a question for us, or two.
No, I'll ask one because I think the time is short. So I'm Vice President Education and Students, but I've spent more than 30 years working in the National Health Service. And my question is about thinking about as the number of older people in the population begins to increase relative to those who are in work, will increasingly need affordable and sustainable social care. So what do you think, do the panel think are the short, medium and long-term policy decisions that need to be made to support that?
Who's got their hand up to jump into the social care first?
Yeah. So one of the challenges with our current system, of course, is that we're not incentivised to take responsibility for our health because we can just get everything for us. And the growing list of things that we can get treated for has gone up and up and up, and that is costing us more and more percentage of GDP. So as a whole population, that is expensive. And whether it's sustainable in the long term is a discussion for the country to have, because 1.7 million people, 180 billion budget, and 67 million people that it sort of serves, these are big numbers that we're throwing around at a time when resources are tighter because we're economically not producing the productivity that we need to produce. So that's a real question of how we fund and what we fund and where we focus the money and the resources we've got, and the manpower. Quite legitimately, we don't have the human capital to do all those roles. Social care is going to be the debate that's not being had right now, because nobody knows how we're going to fund the payment to look after the number of old people that we're going to have who need support in the next 5-10 years, not alone the people that are going to be retiring at that age by 2040. I suspect we're going to need to have some very difficult conversations over the next 5-10 years about retirement age. I think we're going to have very difficult economic conversations about what support the state can provide, given we're already borrowing 100 billion a year right now, and we've got the highest level of debt to GDP and the highest taxes since post-war. How much more flex is in there in the system to produce taxation or borrowing? And I think we may have a conversation later about productivity. So that's going to be a challenge. Local government will need a solution for the long term about how it funds adult social care, and it doesn't have that right now. And indeed, I would suggest the political agenda has been set by the Conservative Party about what the tax position is. The Labour Party will outline what theirs is for the next general election, but it doesn't suggest at the moment that there is any huge increase in the tax burden if there is a change of government, and thus new monies will come to fund social care. But there will need to be something if we're to fund this properly, or we will continue to what we're doing now, which is iterating towards some kind of solution that nobody knows what it is.
I mean, it's a huge problem. I think the test for any good society is how we treat the vulnerable. We're all vulnerable when we are young, when we are old, when we are sick. Right? This is part of our lives, but it seems that we are really relegating this as a political issue. We're not putting the resources into social care that we are obliged to do, I don't think. So there are thousands upon thousands of people working in social care on 0-hour contracts who are earning on average less than people who work in supermarkets, which just suggests we've got our priorities all wrong, I think. I mentioned earlier that the problem of kind of harmful short-termism in politics, it looks as though this is not a vote winner, right? Fixing social care is not a vote winner. So I think this is one of those cases where we really need to knock politicians' heads together and say, can you get together and take some of the heat out of this discussion? Set up a commission if we need to, although we've already had some, but finally act on this issue and deliver on our values as a society. We're a wealthy country, right? We're a wealthy country that ought to be able to look after everybody. And it seems as though we've found ways for decades of not doing that.
I'm not weighing in on this one, Jane. Okay. I'm not going to do it justice, and we don't want to waste time on me struggling through it. I'm just being honest.
No, that's fine. We've only got. I was going to let Satvir have the last one, unless you would like.
No. I mean, this is a very difficult area on social care. There were proposals 3 or 4 years ago to think about using the value of housing. We've gone from a world where 40 or 50 years ago, pensioners were the poorest members of society. The people we now call pensioners are actually the wealthiest people in society. Now, it's cruel to therefore say we should force them to sell their houses to pay for social care, but there's clearly wealth there that could be tapped. Household wealth in this country overall is 7 times income. It's a huge amount of wealth in there. Around half of it is financial, in pensions and savings, and around half of it is in housing wealth. At the same time, many poor people can't, young people, who are often poor as well, can't get on the housing ladder because the price of housing is so high. So there's clearly some intergenerational inequity. Clearly there's some financial resources out there that older people who are pensioners have that we could think about tapping. In a sort of perfect market world, we could write down some form of contract that could pay for some of these things that would then be paid off at the point of death. But we need to think about using some of those resources and building the kind of social care service that Chris was talking about, so that we can relieve that anxiety. A well-run society, a well-run government has to be out there relieving anxiety, getting rid of uncertainty, and planning in a way that just causes people to think, this is being well run. And that's not what's going on at the moment. But one bit of good news is that more and more people, even though we're seeing more people with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, old age diseases, actually more people are living older more healthily and are able to work. So where possible, we need to think of rethinking what we do in the world of work, what happens in a firm. You get older, you get higher in the firm, and then when you reach the top of the tree, you retire and you disappear. But we absolutely need to think of firms thinking much more flexibly about how they can re-employ people again so their experience doesn't get lost. They can continue to earn, and that again gives them some financial ability to support other people in their family or friends in the pursuit of social care or health care. So there's a sort of thinking across the board there that needs to be done before we can solve this problem. And as you say, it's really knotty, and we should all get together, because I think we all agree we need to look after the vulnerable in society. That's all.
I'm just still terrified over retirement age going up. I've already resided to the fact that I'll probably die before I reach retirement age by the time I'm old enough for it. And actually, we talk about it in jest, but there are people that do a lot of manual working and actually do die before they retire. My dad died months before he was about to retire. Like, it's a real serious issue for people that do manual work. So I think that's worth thinking about. Adult social care and response, unless it is reformed, like all councils, I talk to leaders cross-party, all councils will go under. Like, that is just a given unless it's reformed. Using us as an example, but this is the case for most unitaries. Like, demand in adult social care is skyrocketing. The problem we've got as councils is that we've been hanging on to reform, and the promise of reform. Wasn't it Boris who said on the steps of Downing Street, one of my top priorities is reforming adult social care, and then nothing happened. There has been work cross-party. I know the local government association, which is cross-party, has got together, put forward recommendations to government of all different colours, not been taken forward. But unless it's dealt with, you will have councils that only do social care and nothing else, because that's all they'll be able to afford. I do think that we've got an aspiration to ensure that people can live more independently for longer, and if that's the aspiration for this city and for the country, you need to think of ways in which they can do that. And I think other countries are a lot better at tapping into that prevention work than we are as a country. So you look at, how do you ensure that transport is more accessible for an ageing population? How do you ensure that housing is more fit for an ageing population? At the moment, I knock on a lot of doors, as do, I'm sure, other politicians within the room, but I talk to older people who are in a 4 or 5 bedroom house because they raise their family there. They're very happy and willing to move into some supported living or a smaller accommodation, but because we have a housing crisis and we don't have enough supported living or smaller homes or complexes like they do elsewhere, that is why you've got 1 or 2 individuals that probably can't even go upstairs anymore, so they're actually living downstairs, taking up family homes. So it's not even a case of building loads more housing, it's just sweating our assets that we've currently got, but no one is actually taking that seriously within the country, which I find hugely frustrating. So reform has to happen. There is cross-party consensus. We just need the government to act, because my council and other councils will go under in the meantime. And if we really want people to live independently for longer, we've got to take that seriously within our infrastructure, and particularly in housing.
Thank you. So I'm afraid we're moving towards becoming out of time. I'm going to take one last question. So apologies to colleagues who've got questions prepared and we haven't come to their topics. I'm going to turn to a last question from Ed Saltmarsh, who's an alum, and I want the panel to focus on just a 1-sentence answer each, if I may. So, Ed.
Hiya, thank you. So my question it builds on a theme, actually, of the first question that you were asked, which is perpetual economic growth actually compatible with living on a planet Earth that survives? Can we live within Earth's planetary boundaries if we carry on growing forever?
Let's start there.
Yes, we can. We'll find some new solutions. And we've done this for thousands of years. The human spirit is capable of doing it, but it will look very different to what we're doing now.
Yeah, don't worry. It'll be fine.
Okay. Alice.
No. Sorry, you said sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I don't think we have reason for confidence that we can. So we should act as if we can't and start taking serious decisions now.
Ed, sorry, just to clarify, when you say growth, do you mean economic growth, population growth, or just growth in general?
I mean economic growth, I guess, because that's how our society is currently framed. And we've heard tonight about how we need growth to pay for the services, but it can't keep growing.
So, my concern when people talk about growth is because they talk about it in isolation, but actually what we really need to focus on, and particularly councils are trying to focus on, we're trying to focus on this, is inclusive growth. So there's no point growing for the sake of growing or growth for the sake of growth. Actually, you need to grow, and that growth needs to benefit local people and local needs, so which is why our Renaissance Board, which I'm pointing at Jane because she sits on it time to time, when we talk about growth and the businesses that want to invest in our city, we need to be really clear and say, thanks very much, but that's not the kind of business we want in our city, but actually try to attract the kind of business that will create local jobs, is more sustainable, looks at the green agenda, and so there is a way to grow more sustainably in an inclusive way. And actually, if we do absolutely nothing, I think the answer on this side of the bench is probably accurate. But if we do actually decide to do something about it, which I think is just happening at too slow a pace, then I do think we can be confident. So, for example, if we do nothing in Southampton, by absolutely nothing to tackle the climate crisis in Southampton, parts of our city will be underwater. That is just fact. So it's down to us to act now to ensure we can reassure you that you will have a healthy, prosperous life.
Well, on that note, thank you everybody so much for coming. Those of you who know me know that it's been really difficult for me to sit here and not answer questions myself. So I am a professor of demography, which is about population change, and I direct a centre on called Connecting Generations, which is all about intergenerational relations and justice. But I think I can retire now because we have such fantastic answers from our panels. Just really like to thank the panel, thank the FOS team, Faculty of Social Sciences, team for organising this. Not all of you know the complicated acronyms we use in the university. I'd like to thank the audience for your questions and your participation and your engagement. There is a drinks reception, so there is such a thing as a free drink, across the road in the John Hansard Gallery immediately after this. And there's a fantastic exhibition in the John Hansard Gallery at the moment around social mobility, put on by our social mobility network at the university. So please join us there, and please thank the panel. Thank you.